Hello and welcome to day 2 of 5 of Death Journaling in Real Life. I am Francesca Lynn Arnoldi, and I'm here with a friend in death care named Jennifer O'Brien. I'm so excited to have this guest, and you will be so excited to get to know her more if you don't know her already. We were talking before we came on about our origin connection story, and we are both a little equally fuzzy on the details, but it was definitely through shared circles and through social media. And I remember initially seeing some of your posts. I think it was when the book was maybe coming out. I think
Yours or mine?
yours.
Okay. Okay.
I think it was when your book was coming out, and I saw the art pieces that you do, and I was thrilled at your really creative angle within this field and within this topic. So if you want to describe your book for a minute for people, I see it in the background there. It's just beautiful. I'd love for you to tell us a little bit about the book.
Sure. So my name is Jennifer O'Brien, and my late look, Martha, hi. Sorry, distracted by my art. That's so cool. So my name is Jennifer, and my late husband was just this wonderful palliative care physician who got diagnosed with a stage 4, really advanced renal clear cell carcinoma. And he lived for 22 months following the diagnosis. And I am a self-taught artist. So I started art journaling as purely as a form of self-care. I mean, we are talking about journaling today, so why not throw a little art in there? And I kept the journal for the 22 months that he lived, and I kept going with it for about a year and a half after he died. At which point, I'm also in healthcare on the sort of administrative leadership side, and I shared my journal with a neurologist who I worked with, who was in the process of diagnosing 3 different patients with ALS, and he read it and said, yeah, you're not getting your journal back. I'm going to loan it to these patients that I'm diagnosing, and you need to figure out how to get that thing published, because it would be a big help to people who are in your situation, who are the loved ones, the family caregivers of someone who has typically a terminal diagnosis. And so I did. I found a public small press, and it was launched late February of 2020, so just 3 weeks before the pandemic hit. And yeah, it's won 4 awards, including a Nautilus Award. But perhaps what has me just most in awe of the whole endeavor is how many people that it's helped. People whose loved one gets diagnosed, and they find it helpful along the way. And in some cases, people whose loved one has already died, and they go back and feel some validation of what they experienced as they were taking care of their person. So yeah. So I kind of got into it by accident,
And I just think I applaud that doctor that you had shown your work to. I applaud you. I applaud the publishing house that went for this, because this is really atypical, the format. It's not what you see.
No,
Yeah.
It is. It's totally atypical. It's 8 by 10. It's premium color. It's as much an art book as it is a caregiver's guide. And so, yes, I think it was they took a big chance on me, and yeah, for sure.
And individuals, we all have different unique ways of expressing ourselves and of tapping into our inner experience, our feelings, our reactions, our responses to intensity. And so what a beautiful way to offer another, pathway, another lifeline to people who are struggling. So thank you for the work you do. And so what happened was I was admiring your work, and there's one particular part of the book that really stood out to me, and that was precious time. And I loved the description of precious time. And so I reached out to you as I was in the midst of writing out my manuscript. And I am not terribly artistic. I do love collaging. So that's another reason why your work kind of stood out to me. I do a vision board every year, and I have mine right in front of me that I can see. So I love that, but I'm not, it's not a strong suit of mine. And so I knew that I wasn't going to be creating anything for my own book that was very artistic, but I thought, how nice would it be to infuse something that is from someone else who has that stronger skill set than I do. So I reached out to you about precious time, and I asked if you could, I didn't go back into our email threads or anything, but I'm pretty sure I asked if you could create an artistic depiction of the concept of precious time. And you agreed.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Yes, that was really, that, you know what, that was such a, it's all coming back to me now too. The other reason I knew about you was your children's book.
Oh, right.
Your
Yes.
children's book came out. I bought a copy of that, and knowing how what utter bravery it takes to put these books out into the world, I'm fairly certain I went straight to Amazon to give you a good review, because we live and die by those things, quite frankly, and they're really important. And it's mostly when you've gone through it that you know that. So yes, and then when you contacted me and said, you know, hey, what do you think about me including something about precious time in the book, and then asked me, yeah, and that was a wonderful challenge, because your book was not premium color. And so the idea was to try to come up with something black and white, something with cleaner lines. And yeah, and so that, yeah, I really, yeah, that was a wonderful challenge.
Yeah, and we went back and forth a
That.
couple of times, or just twice, I think. And
Yep.
actually, people who are in the crowd, if you have the book already in your hands and you've seen this, drop it in the chat, just because I'd be interested to know if you found this page. It's pretty deep into the book. It's in one of the latter sections, and I'm going to pull up a screen share if I can in a minute here to show a little peek at it. But yeah, we went back and forth, I think just twice. I think I forget the original concept, and then I looked at it, and I forget what sort of back and forth we had, but then you were like, okay, I'm gonna do something else. I'm gonna rework it slightly. And then you came back with the original version, and I was like, oh my gosh, like I'm getting goosebumps just thinking about it, because the way that it worked out, and I'll show people, it was so perfect. And I was so pleased with it. Okay, so here is a little peek into it. This is a preprint version of it, so it's not exactly what you'll see in the book. I actually pushed back after I reviewed this, and I asked them to make the artwork bigger. So they did. And I loved how precious time fit in with the clock. It was the exact right number of letters to match the clock. And anyway, you can tell us a little bit about your inspiration behind that, but I just loved it.
Yeah, it did go through a couple of different iterations. If you've seen the one in my book, it's multiple layers of clock parts, and then a photo, an antique photo of a little girl who is actually my grandmother. And so I think when I started out, I was a little too deep into that. And my first version, I think, had an outline of that photo of her, you know, with a little cap and so forth.
Mhm.
And the clock, you know, just trying to get across the concept of precious and time. And then, you know, that you came back with some questions about, well, couldn't we do that? And it was so perfect, because you just really gave me the nudge I needed to start looking at things like, well, how do the words fit in there? Do they fit in there? And then the dandelion, you know, that really sort of says it all, you know, it's fleeting. And so, yeah,
And those wishes
absolutely
into the
loved-
wind.
Sorry.
And those wishes into the wind,
Yeah.
right? When we're blowing the dandelion. Yeah.
Yes, yes, exactly. Oh, there you go. Martha's got the page. I had to take it. The art that you see behind me on this side is all from the book, and I had to take that one down because I have to have it repositioned in the frame. It was sort of getting askew. So yeah, it was really a fun project, Francesca. Thank you very much for that.
Oh, I'm so pleased to have it in there. So I would love to hear your perspective on death journaling. I'm asking people that I respect and admire to try to get a number of perspectives and voices, because this book, is meant for mortals, but mortals are unique beings and we all have our different take on things. We all have our different needs and worries and wishes that we carry into our death journaling. So I'd love for you to share about death journaling in your own life and, as an advocate and a speaker, as I know you are.
Well, first of all, thank you for this gift to all of us, because as you know, I'm a big believer in journaling, and this is a wonderful guide. Your book is a wonderful guide to journaling and a wonderful testament to the power of journaling. So for that, I am very grateful, and I love the book. I mean, it's just I love the layout. I love what you have to say. I love the mixture of really good hard fact with, hey, here's how you might, here's some questions to help you think about how this fits for you. So I absolutely love the book, and I love the spaces to write in the book, which are great. My art journaling, my death journaling has a little bit of a different path. In so much as I am what's called a solo ager. I have no heirs. My father just died last July, and he was the last of my immediate family, including my husband, to die. And so I have no children. So I have my plans pretty much in order. I say pretty much only because there's a couple of little special precious items that I have not put names on, but other than that, everything is done as far as the details of what I want and so forth. And I don't feel like I have, at least at this stage, and I'm only 57, so we'll see. But at this stage, I don't have an obvious person or group of people to leave a distinct legacy to. So anyway, so that's a little bit of a different spin on things, although not unusual. One in 5 Americans over the age of 50 are solo agers. So this is not something that we're not going to run into in our work. I mean, it is 20% of us. So it's worth some exploration, but I will tell you the emotional challenges of it are pretty substantial. It is hard to do. It's hard to do, right? Death planning and death journaling and death anticipation for ourselves, period. Because it's hard when we think about saying goodbye to the people we love. And I will tell you, it's a different kind of hard when there won't be anybody to say goodbye to. It's just a different kind of difficult that just makes it hard to go into some of those details and so forth, knowing that who knows, there'll be an attorney who will carry everything out for you instead of, and he probably won't be crying. I'm kidding. He might cry. He might miss me. But anyway, so yeah, so I've worked on it. I mostly am leaving behind what I'm doing now, my art journal, and my other sort of contributions. I've done some, guest blogging and things like that. So yeah.
Thank you so much for sharing that. As we were talking about before we came on, it's such a powerful position, and because it's like not a lot of people would have the courage to really name it and share about that. And you're reaching people, like you said, 20% of agers. It's so important that people know that they're not alone in that, and that they can feel validated as well. And with the book, my hope is that people will find their own way through it, their own best process through it. And so it might mean, as I mentioned in the introduction, it's try and modify, and it's peruse and choose. It's really thinking about what appeals to you. What work do you feel like is calling to you? What tasks do you feel like you'd like to complete? And there might be sections that people sort of skim or skip over, or maybe they jump in at a certain spot and then they kind of work back. And we have different seasons in life, right? And things can change, and it can be
Sure.
available for those changes and new relationships that might develop. And for the people who haven't done a whole lot of end of life care planning yet, this book doesn't supply the legal medical forms, but it supplies the precursor to that. So really thinking about, who are you internally? Who are you in terms of your beliefs, your values, your priorities, so that you can then begin to complete those forms or revise those forms, revisit them as well. Because even if you don't have necessarily an agent or a healthcare surrogate chosen in your life, you can have documents that speak to who you are and what you would want in certain situations. And so for your care providers who may not be as closely connected with you, it's such important communication to be able to share with them.
Absolutely.
Mhm.
Absolutely.
Well, thank you so much for sharing that. I want to encourage our crowd here to feel free to ask questions, or you can put comments into the chat if you would like. We have a couple more topics that we're going to talk through, but I also am wondering what's on your mind. So feel free to share. Or as you begin to think about your own death journaling in your life, what are your hopes? What are your goals? What are your intentions? Be lovely to hear. So the other topic that I wanted to talk with you is about sourcing creativity.
Yeah. Well, it's funny that you bring that up, because as you were talking about the book, and you use these two very clever terms that I completely passed through my brain, but when you were saying them, anyway, that this journal, that your book is a prompt. My inclination, after reading some of the prompts in the book, were to go to create art. I posted something this morning that I hope doesn't get me in trouble with anybody, but it was on the topic of, speaking of creative sourcing. I find a lot of times listening to the dialogue is what, and then rethinking it and replaying it is part of what brings me creativity, fodder. And so the other night I did a nightclub. Like, it's called Potluck and Poison Ivy, but it's a Southern storytelling event with live music in a small theater space. And I was the guest to tell my story and to talk about what I have to talk about. So it was a really unusual setting. There were cocktails served and all sorts of, nightclubby kinds of things, but yet we were talking about my story and end of life and so forth. And then we opened it up to questions. And one of the people, and a lot of folks here, of course, knew Bob, my late husband. And so anyway, one of them asked about the stages of grief, and did I spend a lot of time in the anger stage of grief? And I answered the question. Of course, I didn't have a lot of anger when it came to Bob's death. But we launched into a bit of a conversation in the room about this notion of stages of grief. And so that got me thinking about how the five of them are spot on, but the word stages seems to hang people up, right? And especially those people who don't have a lot of experience with grief. they think somehow you're supposed to start at one stage and progress through it and get to the next one and progress through it and finally, hallelujah at acceptance. And of course, we all know that's not the way it works. It's not linear in any way, shape, or form. So I started to think about it and replay that conversation, and then I imagined, okay, well, if they're not stages, what are they? Are they ingredients? And then I was like I was even exploring how many ingredients are there to say bread. And then I realized, no, they're not ingredients, because ingredients implies a recipe. And a recipe requires all of the ingredients. And we frequently don't go through every single one of the 5 stages. So ingredients is not going to work. And then I came up with the idea of elements, like the periodic table. And elements, I thought, wow, that really works, because any one element stands alone, strong and powerful, and yet they can interact with one or all of the rest of them. There can be various energy sources that create different reactions. And it seemed to me that they are 5 elements of grief. And so I played around with that. And if you follow me on social media, you can see that I posted today a little graphic about the 5 elements of grief. Oh, look, Martha, you are my Vanna White sister.
Very sweet message from Martha there, that she will weep for Jennifer, and I'm sure Martha won't be alone. You will be missed, and you have made an impact. Absolutely.
Oh, thank you.
And Amal said something beautiful as well about this work being so important, because we didn't used to be so death averse, and now we have a generation of youth who are more afraid to die. Yeah, and that her hope, and gender assuming, sorry, Amal's hope is that death journaling can help more people open up about their thoughts and feelings concerning death, what their ideal of a full life is, and what they want to say to the next generations. Essentially, what story do you want to share? Beautifully written. Love that. Thank you. Yeah, and you might have hit a kind of a contentious topic with that one for sure, and you know that, but it's tricky because Elizabeth Kubler-Ross was studying anticipatory grief when she was sitting bedside with people. And so she was really looking at, how do we integrate the news of our mortality, of having a terminal diagnosis, of when time is short? How do we grapple with that and some of the emotions that tend to arise as we're facing death so imminently? And then it was sort of co-opted into bereavement grief. And in some ways, it is still quite applicable. And those are certainly elements that people experience. And then, beyond that, thinking about anxiety and just a whole range of emotional and physical and psychological reactions and responses. So
Well,
sure
you're absolutely right. But what's undeniable is the degree to which it has permeated popular thought. Right.
Oh,
so
absolutely.
So that is, it's here.
Yeah.
Larger than all of us put together. We've got everybody from total experts in it to complete novice, have never lost anybody in their lives, using this language. So it has to be discussed. It's part of us. It's part of our world. And so, yeah, you're right. I was well aware that it's, that it's exciting. It may have an exciting reaction.
It may. And I mean, I'm so grateful to Elizabeth Kubler-Ross and the work that she did to put a spotlight on the dying phase of life, and that it is important, and that it deserves support, and it deserves that sort of that look into it, that glimpse into it, instead of, pushing it aside, putting it, into the shadows, into the corners, trying to avert our eyes from it so much. She bravely sat there and listened to people and asked them questions and had conversations, and was really an integral part of our formal hospice that came into being. So,
yeah.
So grateful there for sure. All right. So I'm wondering, we have 5 minutes left. anybody want to share how you source creativity? Because that's kind of where we started. And it might be like Jennifer's story where you just sort of hear something and it little spark goes off and it inspires you. Or where else do you find it? I think reading is really important to me, whether it's nonfiction or fiction. Music, somebody put in there, very powerful. I also find that if I am trying to force creativity to arise, I often get sort of stuck in that. But if I take a break and I go out and take my dog for a walk, and we're just sort of tromping through the woods near our property, then it starts to flow. And it's like, if I try too hard, sometimes I kind of sabotage it. And that has worked really well for me. So other people are saying reading, music, sitting or observing nature, discussions with others, ceramics, definitely. It's beautiful. As I was starting the process of writing this book, I remember feeling nervous that I would have enough to say. I wasn't sure how much I had to say about things. And so an acquisitions editor reached out to me and we sort of talked back and forth a couple times about initial ideas and what his vision was originally. And then I sat with it. And then I feel like once I sort of opened my mind to the possibility of it, I was pretty much flooded. And I took a giant piece of paper and I did some mind mapping, which is not something I often do, but I felt like it would be useful to do it at this time because a book just seems like such a huge endeavor. Like, where do you start? Where's your entry point? How do you attack this beast? And so I, on this huge piece of paper, did some mind mapping, and I had a couple of giant clouds with my two initial ideas, which was my death journal and then my working through wishes project as well. And I do often, they're getting some feedback from people in here, but it's nice to see faces. So I had those two original concepts. And then from there, I was like, I don't exactly know where I'm going to go. I just allowed myself to be led in different directions. And it was actually really important for me to allow versus force. I don't know if that's the same for you. I'm hearing some, getting some head nods and other people saying yes to that.
I wanted to respond to Jennifer's elements. I'm Leepika, and in our family,
it's nice to see you.
Hi there. We use grief as a pinball. And so if you think of the stages being those different bumpers, sometimes it's the flick of a wrist or the scent of honeysuckle or a certain thing sends you into a completely different direction you weren't expecting because, you pulled it this way and you're like, oh, grief is going to go this way. It's a big arc. And then suddenly you hit all these other things and you don't know when you're going to hit something that suddenly bounces you back into another stage. But I love the elements aspect of that. It's a little less, I guess, whimsical than what our family talks about with death.
But that's great. Thank you for sharing that visualization, because I think for mourners, it can feel like your thoughts are just ping-ponging all over in your brain. And you sometimes feel like you have very little control about the direction that they're going in and what's going to set it off.
Right, exactly. And the other thing I wanted to say is when I'm sourcing creativity, I always start in nature. I try and ground barefoot in my yard and maybe touching the spines of the backsides of leaves, looking at the veins, coming back in, getting some comfy tea that I like. And then putting on like Baroque classical is always a really good mind opener. That particular subset of classical music tends to be really light up pieces of my brain, creatively speaking. And then the colors. So I just kind of lay out colors because as I journal every day about death and life and everything else, I draw in between the words sometimes, or if I'm feeling stuck, I start by just hand drawing a little bit like some people do Zentangles or pointillism with dots and see where that takes me when I think of a thing related to death or the meaning of my life, whichever I happen to be focusing on that day. things come, and sometimes it's, the color of my daughter's swimsuit when she was 6 and we were on the Emerald Coast of North Florida. And that reminds me of the time she just suddenly asked me about a shell and then said, "What used to live in here? Why did it have to die?" And then I can kind of write about those things in really simple terms of how we talked about them. Other times, it reminds me of some other thing. I'm sipping the tea and I was like, the last time I did this was with my late mother 13 years ago, when she was saying I could really go for some kind of flower tea. And I was like, ooh, this is the only flower tea I have is hibiscus, and she's like, okay, I guess, and we laughed because she used to have just so many different herbal teas. And I think, it, I never know. And for me, it's that pinball, even in thinking of death and the anticipatory grief is, I don't know where it's going to take me. And so it's wonderful to kind of look back and go, that was quite a journey. I thought I was going to write about this.
Yeah.
And look at this little nugget that
Yeah.
came out that would thrill my now teenager who's has an opinion about everything to know there were moments where she asked me anything.
Yeah.
Yeah. She has this
Thank you.
moment.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Lapika. And I've read some of your writing. It's really beautiful. You have a way with words. So thank you for sharing that. I really appreciate it. All right, we're coming up on time, but I want to hear Amal. Go ahead. Share with us what's on your mind.
Hi, everyone. Please excuse my voice, my sinuses.
Oh, I'm sorry.
But I think that the pinball illustration that Lapika gave is actually very good and very poignant to how people experience grief. I think the issue that some people have with the Kubler-Ross is that people think when they look at it, they think everything's going to be in a linear phase.
Mm-hmm.
And so when you look at it as a pinball, you're going to hit those elements eventually somewhere, but it's not going to be in a straight, linear, consecutive phase. You're going to bounce back and forth. You're going to go forward. You're going to go backward. You're going to go around. And I think that having that visual of a pinball actually makes it very relatable because grief is not something that we graduate from. It's just like recovery. You don't graduate from it. You're constantly in it. You just learn how to grow around it.
Yeah.
So I think that having that visual is very, very key to helping people to deal with their grief because looking at it as a pinball, it's much like life. I tell people all the time that life is very much a set of changes and uncertain situations, and you have to learn how to react to them because this is your first time dealing with them. So I think that looking at it like this and having this practice of writing about grief and death and things like that, it helps you to be more aware, but it helps you to be more intentional with how you live your life as well. So bringing crafts into that, seeing that there is a beauty in the process, I think can also help people to have a bit more, less of a negative view of it, more of an appreciative view of it, that we're all going to go through it, but the way that we can definitely choose how we react to it and how we deal with the phase.
Thank you so much for sharing that. I hope you feel better, but your voice came through and we have closed captioning and it captured your words beautifully. I really appreciate that. Yeah, we don't graduate from grief. We learn to live around it, as you said. We learn to integrate it. We learn to navigate through it and with it. And it doesn't ever completely leave us. It just becomes part of us and we learn to live with that part of us. Thank you. What a beautiful closing. I want to thank Jennifer, my guest, so much for taking the time to join me. Thrilled to have you. It was a lovely session. And everyone for joining us. Thank you so much for your presence and your support and your words that you shared in the chat and aloud. And I hope that you will continue to join us. We have a couple more fun guests. So I will see you all tomorrow. Take care.